You're listening to Conservation Connection. I'm Chance.
I'm Sarah Catherine.
We're a husband and wife team running an environmental education nonprofit that's focused on connecting students to their environment.
Each week, here on Conservation Connection, we do just that by introducing you to the groundbreaking science and conservation work that's happening every day across the globe.
We talk to professionals working to protect our planet and ask them about their career,
Their current projects,
their wild and crazy stories from the field,
and everything in between.
This episode is a collaboration with the Sun Valley Forum in Sun Valley, Idaho.
The Sun Valley Forum is an intergenerational meeting of forward-thinking professionals that come from a diverse range of disciplines.
These experts are on the cutting edge of what's happening in the fight for our future, and they've all come together at the Sun Valley Forum to share ideas and to collaborate on solutions for a greener tomorrow.
Let's get to the show.
Alrighty guys, welcome to another episode of Conservation Connection. We are so incredibly excited to be back here at the Sun Valley Forum again in 2023. We got some awesome episodes last year. We're fortunate enough to be invited again this year, and I'm very excited for this episode. We've been sitting here chatting for a couple of minutes now with Dr. Michael Dorsey. He is the director and chair of the Rob and Melanie Walton Sustainability Solutions Service at Arizona State University. And this is going to be kind of a wild ride. We're going to see where this conversation takes us because this man has done so many things in so many sectors. And I'm really just kind of excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, well, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for being our first guest during the forum. So why don't we start with, why are you here in Sun Valley for the forum?
I'm here in Sun Valley in part because Amy Christensen of Christensen Global has been haranguing me for years and years, year on year. You should come to the forum. You should come to the forum. You should come to the forum. And the timing never works. It's something I've always wanted to do. I've been paying keen attention. I paid keen attention over many years of what Amy's been doing in the sustainability space, in the renewable energy space, and it's work I think that people need to watch. People are watching, no doubt. It's work that's super critical for delivering that healthier planet that we absolutely need, that we can have, and that we must have. So I'm here to engage in that ecosystem that she's created with her team.
Yeah, she's definitely a sort of a force of nature for nature, doing some really, really cool work here. We're really glad to be at the forum. I'm just excited to be, this is kind of one of the centers of a bunch of really powerful people in a lot of different sectors coming together to have conversations that really, really matter.
So let's start in now with your work at the Sustainability Solutions Service at ASU. You made a point to tell us when we were speaking with you a little earlier, it's not a center, it's a service. So
Right.
Why don't we start, I guess, with what's the difference there?
Sure. So we are the Sustainability Solutions Service, the Rob and Melanie Walton Sustainability Solutions Service. And critically, we're not a center, as you said. We're not an institute. Those are, I think, common vernacular in the academy and even outside of the academy. If you have an entity that's doing something at a university, people say, "Oh, what's that center do? What's that institute doing?" That's even that vernacular, that scholarly vernacular, is spread outside of the academy. There was a time, however, when universities had an extension service role. And hear that word service. So in the end of the day, we are the planet's largest extension service for sustainability. We are trying to scale and are scaling sustainable solutions to sectors of the economy and to sovereigns, to states, and we're doing that because that's the only thing that has to be done. That's the thing that must be done. If we have a global crisis, whether it's a climate crisis, whether it's a crisis of the warming of oceans and oceans crisis, whether it's the crisis of losing life on the planet as we know it, the biodiversity crisis, which is the collapse of ecosystems. Many simultaneous crises we're experiencing and happening and playing out right before our very eyes at a planetary scale. The only thing to do, the only thing worth doing, is scaling sustainable solutions at the global level. And that's what we do. We do that with folks in the private sector. We do that with public sector entities, governments. We do that with nonprofit organizations. We're working with many entities to scale those sustainable solutions.
So kind of the idea is that we already have a lot of these solutions. We have the technology, we've done the research, and what the Sustainability Solutions Service is doing is making sure that those solutions get into the hands of people outside of the university system, right? People who can implement them in the real world to make real change.
Sort of. So we've got a foot inside the academy and a foot firmly outside of it. So we're certainly taking those solutions, but we're actually working with folks, assembling capital collaboratively. We just signed an agreement with a publicly traded company that's working on chemical recycling of plastics. We did that because we already had an effort on mechanical recycling of plastics. So we're putting those two efforts together. And in our effort on the mechanical side, we were doing, some of the analysis on the scholarly academic side, but also, involved in standing up a factory to do that mechanical recycling of plastics. So we are, working with folks that are out there in the real world, as it were, which is really everywhere. The academy is not, not in the real world.
It's not insulated from the real world.
Right, exactly. So, but doing that in a way that's both not at a distance. We're involved in the transactions. We see some returns come back to the solution service. Those returns certainly come back to our partners as well. So we're, inside of transactions, we're assembling transactions, and also not just doing transactions, moving money around, but coming out with real products that change the way we live in the world.
And one of the points that you made a little bit earlier before we hit record, which was a great conversation, sorry you guys missed it, was that these solutions that you're working with other groups to implement are financially sustainable as well, right? This is not a nonprofit that needs outside funding to sustain it. It's a product, it's a service that is in and of itself able to continue as an independent business.
Absolutely. We've come into a brilliant space in the 21st century where a lot of the good stuff, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's solutions to the global plastics crisis, whether it's things, financial instruments, exchange traded funds that are fossil fuel free. A lot of the good things actually are profitable and only going to get more and more profitable. Right now, we're in a world where you take renewable energy, for example, take solar, wind, even hydro. That renewable energy is, single-digit % of the energy mix in most countries. There's a few outliers, some of the Nordic countries and so forth. But we know already the trajectory. History is being made daily. We sometimes miss it because there's tons of distractions that keep us from seeing the history making that's all around us. But just this year, 2023, was the first year in the history of humanity, where investments in renewable energy exceeded those in fossil fuels, oil and gas.
Wow.
And why is that? That's not because oil companies are suddenly nice and want to protect the planet. That's absolutely because some of those oil companies want to continue their monopoly position in the energy space. And it just so happens that good stuff that a lot of us here in Sun Valley are talking about, renewables, is exceptionally profitable. It's more profitable. The cheapest way to generate power these days, to generate electricity, is not from oil and gas. It's actually from renewable sources. So we're now in a world where the good stuff is very, very profitable, and that's only going to continue to grow. Can you imagine when we're in, on average, single-digit %, we're not just going to double and triple, we're going to quadruple and quintuple that. we're going to go, and we, the renewable sector, as it were, that's the we I'm talking about now, we're going to take that from, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9% up to 60, 70, 80, 90% of the energy mix for all countries on the earth. So that is going to return not millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions or even billions or tens of billions. That's going to return trillions of dollars, hundreds of trillions of dollars. That will redefine economies, lives, ecosystems, communities as we know them and have experienced them. What we see around us now, in 100 years, for the lucky of a few of us who will be around then and more like our children, it will not look like what you see out the window today.
So that was something I was actually going to ask, is how long do you anticipate that change over time taking to get to that point of like 60, 70% renewable energy being our main source? It's
going to be really, really quick. I think we will see that transition in renewable energy in our lifetimes. It's going to be akin to, there's a survey, I think it's, I'm going to forget the college, a little Midwestern college. They do the annual survey of what incoming first year students know and don't know. Most, and I think maybe it was 5 or 10 years ago. Think about this for a second. The incoming students from 10 years ago had no idea what a dial tone is or was. Mm-hmm. No idea what that was. And you go back 10 years again, so 20, of course, people know about that, right? That's it.
It's part of our everyday lives, right? And it just fell off the map.
It's gone. It's gone, right? There's a phone in this room of this interview that's not even plugged in. It's on the floor, right? There's no dial tone. So the energy transition, it's slowly moving, but very quickly, within the next decade, it's going to explode. And that explosion is going to be sustained. It's going to be sustained explosions. And so we'll see that tremendous change because the green stuff, solar, wind, hydro, the good stuff, it's profitable. Now, the challenge for that is how are we going to enable people to access it? Are we going to charge people on the margins of society for stuff that's free? That's a conversation we've got to have.
Absolutely. And now is the time to be intentional about looking forward and saying, how do we make sure that there's equitable access to these renewable, the good stuff, and that profit is distributed to not just the hands of a few.
Right. Wind and solar look more like annuities than they are, depleting assets. They're definitely not like fossil fuels because, we got that ball in the sky, that fiery ball in the sky, hopefully for, a few more 100 million years.
With any luck.
So that changes, that fact, changes the way we can share the upside. You can move some of the profits, do we need, venture grade returns on renewable investments that I've been involved in making? Do we need that forever? Do I need to hoard those kind of returns? Could I live with, 13, 14%? Probably. Could I live with 10 or 9%, returns? Absolutely. Can we take the deltas there and move them into education, move them into healthcare? That's a conversation as a society we've got to begin to have as this transition happens. Because if we don't, those companies that want to keep their monopoly position in the energy space, that were involved in the dirty stuff just a few years ago and are getting out of that, they'll happily take all of the money.
And they've already got the assets in place to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know the track record is a lot of those folks don't want to share, right? They suffer from, sometimes what we might refer to as a lot of recidivistic corporate criminal activity, right? Dumping in communities, poisoning communities, not just once, not just twice, but as a mode of business, right? So that's sociopathy, which is really what that is, right? If you repeatedly harm somebody and get told that you're harming them and pay fines and just do that over and over again, that's called a sociopath. So we don't use that term to describe energy companies, but that in large part is what we ought to think of them as, and not to sort of, offer it as an epithet, but to think about how we need to change that behavior going forward, because once a sociopath, likely always one. But if we don't have corrective interventions, if we don't have regulations that say proper oversight, proper rules, then the sociopath who's been harming communities is certainly going to hoard all the resources, or hoard as many as they can, and definitely not share them.
And get to do it under the guise of this is good for the planet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's doubly dangerous.
Yeah, because they've learned that it can work. They just keep doing it, and they're like, oh, well, I guess this is okay as long as I like pay my fine or do whatever.
Right.
Like
pay my fine,
which is
and poison
5%
people.
of the money that I made off of that mode of business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. I would love to take a second here and kind of zoom in a little bit on you as a person and your journey, how you got to be the director of the service at ASU, and you just do so many cool things. So let's back up. How did you get?
Some headhunters called me and I picked up the phone. That's, it's a short story, It's
Fair
an
enough.
easy story.
So I guess my question is,
why you?
Why you, and how did you get into sustainability in the first place? As a kid, is this something that you always knew you wanted to go into? Like, what was your journey to get from like kindergarten to here in a condensed space?
To Dr. Dorsey.
Wow. Well, so that's probably a longer story than we have time for. Some might think that I've always been in, I wouldn't even call it the sustainability space. I mean, that's a newish term-ish.
Sure.
It's been around, 20, 30 years. We can go back to the late 80s with the Brundtland Report and, on sustainable development and so forth. So it's not totally new, but, I've always had a concern really about sort of a handful of things. Certainly a love and an appreciation of nature and being out in nature, and thinking about what can we do to keep it safe and, protect it and so forth. And, I've been, out in wilderness, all my life, since, really, really young, age. And increasingly, one of the things that I saw was, not so much the wanton despoliation of nature, whether it's from mining or forest, projects or deforestation, really. Forestry is more about cutting down trees. I've got a forestry degree, and I was taught mainly about how to cut down trees, less about how to, conserve them and so forth, and to prevent them from being commoditized. So that history of being concerned and, both concerned about nature, wanting to protect it, being in it, out in it, experiencing it in wilderness, backpacking, climbing, hiking, all that, mountaineering, got me to see that there were a lot of entities, damaging the stuff that I was really interested in. And it had implications not just on the ecosystems that I had the privilege and pleasure of, experiencing, whether it's, mountaineering or climbing or hiking, whatnot, but also, those companies and entities were threatening communities. They were doing it, fairly overtly in a disproportionate manner. Some of the, poorest, citizens in communities were being harmed. Mining operations were set up in certain areas of wilderness and not others. The industrial pollution is set up in certain parts of a city and not others. And it was pretty easy to see that the distribution of bad stuff was by no means even, right? By no means even. And so, as an early undergrad at the University of Michigan, I got in, cahoots with, now he's emeritus professor, a great friend, and former professor of mine, a fellow called Bunyan Bryant, who was working on issues of environmental justice and environmental racism, basically doing the analysis of, the disproportionate siting of bad stuff, polluting industries, things that were undermining ecosystems and community systems. And so it's been, for me, the journey has been one of, loving nature and wanting to be out in it, and then seeing and tracking the bad things that were undermining not just ecosystems, but communities, and then trying to think, what can we do to stop that nonsense, to stop that madness?
I think it's really interesting that is kind of how you found your way into it, because the longer we run this podcast, Conservation Connection, the longer we've been doing this, we started it in 2019, we hear there's this through line, basically, right? So we've heard it before, that people really love nature and they saw these organizations or like higher up people like harming these communities, and it was disproportionate, right? So you keep hearing that and seeing it, and I feel like even just since last year we're hearing more about it. So I find that really interesting. Just the longer that we've been doing this, like a lot of people are seeing that.
It's, I think, environmental racism, environmental injustice is absolutely visible. And now we have, the curse or luxury of 2-3 decades of research that has given it its visibility, that has enabled us to see analytically the location of polluting facilities, particularly industrial facilities, how they're more adjacent, certainly in the U.S., to poor Black and brown communities, and to communities that have less power to say anything and to react to stop those facilities from operating and poisoning them. But that phenomena is by no means limited to the United States. I mean, it's a phenomenon you see, in other countries, whether it's, harming indigenous people, in the Amazon, deep in the Amazon, whether it's, things as, thankfully less common, these days than, a decade or even 2-3 decades ago, and nuclear testing, which, has certain legacy, proximate here to Sun Valley, just in the neighboring state in Utah, when the U.S. began its, sort of, nuclear manifest destiny, in the mid 20th century, they purposely picked, marginalized, extremely faithful communities in Utah because they knew that they could exploit those two variables. Right? There was absolute conscious thought about who can we trick and fool to basically harm and deny that we're harming them. Native folks, faithful folks of Latter-day Saints, Mormons, and they did that. And that legacy is still playing out in those communities to this day.
Yeah. I find that really interesting. And I also feel like the evolution of social media, right, is everyone sees it more. It's harder to be like, oh no, it's fine. Everything's fine.
And that's a really interesting point, because the powers that be that are making those conscious decisions are also putting a fair amount of power towards trying to prevent it from becoming visible. And as platforms emerge that are harder to control, the fact that we all carry cameras around in our pockets, right? Or that anybody with a phone can set up a podcast and start talking about things that they see in their community. It's become this sort of arms race of higher visibility and more effort put into hiding the harm that they're doing in marginalized communities.
Absolutely. And no one should underestimate or overestimate who has the ability to showcase good or evil. A lot of old media, as you all know, has, evaporated. It's gone away. There are fewer eyeballs on the New York Times and Washington Post and Newsweek, than, some individuals' own personal feeds. Some people got more eyeballs looking just at them than they do looking at news and looking at, relevant stuff.
Which, in my opinion, is both fantastic and also terrifying, because there's less vetting of information that's being passed around, and it allows people to exploit, like you were saying, people who they can easily trick into following them, sharing their opinions, doing what they want them to do without the kind of vetting that comes from a news organization that's concerned about its reputation as a balanced news source. Like I was saying, anybody with a phone can start a podcast, and it really requires more savvy on the consumer to understand what story is being told and the slant with which that story is being told. Media is a very different world today than it was even 15 years ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So getting back a little to the Rob and Melanie Walton Sustainability Solutions Service at ASU, you've been there. How long have you been there?
Just about a year.
Okay.
Just about a year.
Okay. So
I'm new.
You're new. Okay.
I'm new.
You're new.
But he speaks with such authority about it. It's great.
I know. You could have been there forever, as far as we know.
I've been in this space, you know, of sustainability for a while.
Right.
I'm not new to that to the space.
Right. Yeah. And so, how long has the Solutions Service? When did that first start?
So Rob and Melanie came to Arizona State University, almost a decade ago. And they made the inaugural gift that helped create the Solution Service in 2012. So just over a decade ago. They did that in part because, if you know anything about, the Walton family, they've got a long legacy of, really being, I would say, both concerned and interested in protecting the environment and ecosystems, but really doing that really, really early on. They've been first movers in a lot of efforts, to do that. And so that sustained early first mover sensibility compelled them to, seek out Arizona State University and say, hey, we'd love to endow this solution service to do the work of scaling, sustainability. And here we are a decade later.
Doing the work.
Doing the work, exactly.
So what do you see now that you're there and you've been there for a year and obviously in the field for much longer? What do you see as the future of this service?
So really, our event horizon is not to be a cost center. We're certainly, and we will always be grateful for the gift from Rob and Melanie that, stood up the service. But now the projects that we work on, there is that upside, and we're involved in these transactions, and we are going to continue to be involved in them, whether it's, we're working on energy issues, we're working with municipalities, working on health and well-being, we're working on circular economy, working on many, many areas where we can be involved in returning, call it profits, call it benefit, because it's not just money. We're returning both and engaged in the creation of knowledge, innovative ideas. There isn't a single sort of, one size fits all, one rule book, one playbook on how to scale sustainability. But at the service, we are aggregating the multiplicity of rule books in a multiplicity of languages to facilitate that true global scaling of the solution set, whether it's on, renewable energy, working with organizations like Black Owners of Solar Services, a new trade association, one of the largest association of Black developers, solar developers in the United States, whether it's working with groups like Navajo Power, which is working not just, in the Navajo Nation, but working across Indian country, installing and particularly at the utility scale, renewable energy projects, whether it's working with groups like Clean Vision, Clean Seas, which is working in the chemical recycling of plastic waste. So the event horizon is to bring back both the returns from the upside from those transactions and those business deals, as it were, but also then to continue to scale those solutions globally to get us in a place that, basically is a healthier planet for everybody.
Going along with that, probably my favorite thing that's come out of this episode so far is your phrase, the good stuff is profitable, right? That's what it boils down to, is that
it is.
You're working on a multiplicity of levels with as diverse a group of people as I've ever seen to bring that to be.
Yeah.
Right.
And the good stuff is profitable. That's a new thing, right? That's new. It wasn't the case even 10 years ago. So when the service stood up, solar, wind renewable energy was not the cheapest way to generate energy. It was not. Fast forward in less than a decade, about, depending on where you are, 5, 6, 7 years ago, renewable energy was becoming the cheapest way to generate power. Now it absolutely is, and there's no going back. There's no going back at all. But that reality, while that's hugely beneficial for the planet, for protecting ecosystems, for delivering the good stuff that we know we need, we know we got to get out of this fossil fuel racket, we know we got to bring an end to oil and gas, to that sector. We also now need to think about the just distribution of that upside. And the failure to think about the just distribution of that upside, of the profitability of the good stuff, that's an error that we can't repeat. We did that with the bad stuff. Right. We let those sociopathic companies hoard the upside and poison people at the same time. Folks are essentially doubly damned, right? Poor folks, still in this country, we got to change this. Poor people pay the largest, most disproportionate amount of their income for energy, to keep the lights on, to keep the houses warm, or to keep them cool. And so much so that sometimes they don't have money to keep the houses warm or to keep the lights on or keep the houses cool. That's an artifact of the hoarding of profits, right? That's Absolutely. An artifact of that sociopathy of that old, 20th century energy industry. We don't have to live like that in the 21st century, and certainly not in the 22nd century and beyond. But the way to get out of that is we have to force a conversation about sharing the upside, which we absolutely can. And it's not just sharing it with energy users. There's enough upside in the new energy economy, what's the good stuff, that we can move resources into healthcare. We can move them into education, into a great many other areas. The sun is an annuity, and we've got to think about how we can manage that money in that manner for the most upside and the most good for all. And a failure to do that is irresponsible.
I completely agree. And kind of as we're talking about this idea of the just distribution of this new system, I would love to hear your thoughts on how that ties in with the idea of like a decentralized electric grid, where rather than having, today we have thermal electrical generation systems that burn some sort of a fossil fuel or use a nuclear reactor to generate massive amounts of electricity at one point. We're trying to move to a system where individual neighborhoods, even down to the individual property level, are generating enough electricity on site that it manages all of their needs rather than having to transport it back and forth. So in your much greater experience and expertise about these matters, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on how decentralization plays into this.
So, right now, a decentralized grid is really, really tough. It's certainly a destination where we need to be oriented toward. The challenge, of course, is that centralization dominates, right?
Well, it's more efficient, right?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No. It's more efficient for the concentration of capital, right? That's what it's more efficient about, right? It's not more efficient for, heating people's homes. It's actually quite inefficient, right? A far off facility, there's a tremendous amount of degradation when you push power around, right? And that's a byproduct of that inefficient centralized system. It's more efficient for command and control purposes. If one facility goes off, well, maybe if you're lucky, you might be able to pivot to another centralized facility. But that actually creates some security risks, in the advent of, conflicts. Hopefully there won't be any, but you can destroy one facility and take down a whole swath, region of power and supply. So that's an inefficiency. A unit facility is concentrated, but if it goes down, it has huge widespread implications. Whereas a decentralized system, basically, it never goes down, right? You might have the house go down, but that system is one where there's a tremendous amount of resilience built into it. The challenge going forward is really going to be dialing out of the centralized system economically. That's the true challenge. And that dial out is only going to happen when government comes to the table and makes, really commits large resources. It's really beyond the the capacity of even some individual firms to do that. It's also going to take the political pressure of citizens to continue to demand that, and also to continue to have the right to do decentralized systems, which some communities don't actually have that right. There are prohibitions about how you can, put your house completely off grid, or how you can actually connect to the grid and so forth. So we need different sets of laws and regulations and rules to really drive that transition to the most efficient system, which is absolutely, bar none, decentralized.
I love when I get to learn on this podcast. Like, I love it when we sit down and I get information that I've never had that conversation before. It's one of my favorite things.
Well, I try.
Well, you're crushing it, so.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm very excited for us to hopefully be able to find the time to catch your other talks while you're here at the forum. But for now, as we're wrapping up, I would love to ask the question, if someone's listening to the podcast and wants to get into a similar field of sustainability, or maybe even looking forward as the workforce is changing, as we're becoming more sustainable, what would you recommend? Like, what would be your recommendation for them?
Walk outside. Look, in Texas, there's more people in solar than there are in oil and gas and cattle combined. Wow. Right? In California, all those, aspiring actors and actresses, or now we just say actors, right? All those aspiring actors, there are more people in California in renewable energy than all of Hollywood.
Wow.
Walk outside. Wherever you thought you were and whatever you thought was going on, from the comfort of your living room or your studio apartment or your big giant house on a hill, it's not going on. The renewable energy and the other good stuff didn't become profitable because nobody is employed and working in the sector, right? The good stuff became profitable because of tremendous amount of capital, tremendous amount of human resources that are going into that, and the co-benefit of it being good, right? So pretty much wherever you live, there is a lot more opportunities than there were. And that's actually going to increasingly be the case. Right now, for installing the good stuff, I came back to the academy, to Arizona State, from being in the private sector, being in the solar business. We have a lot of trouble now as solar, deployment is accelerating, of finding electricians. There are not enough. There are not enough people that want to get up on the roofs. We don't have the capacity. We don't have enough people that have the technical skills to drive the renewable revolution to save the planet. So I would tell people to literally walk out the door, read the paper, Google solar jobs. You will not find a shortage. It is right now, and this is a tremendous upside for any listener, no matter age, no matter ability, no matter creed, ethnicity, religion, the doors are wide open because there are more jobs than there are people to fill those jobs, right? So this is hopefully won't be forever the case, but this is the moment now. This is the sustainability sector situational moment. So you don't have to hunt and search. Wherever you are, I promise you that there's more stuff happening in the green space, and not just energy, biodiversity, forest management, land management, other types of, waste recycling. China did an interesting thing just a few years ago. They said, hey, you Yankees and rest of the world, stop sending us your crap. Stop putting those blue bins in front of your houses out there in America, and then dumping it on a boat and sending it to us. So when they did that, that created a huge new industry of the recycling industry in the US. 70, 80, 90% of recycled products, in years before China put a ban on sending waste trash and recycled material, before they dropped that ban, their iron sword law, most of the recycled stuff was sent abroad. It was not recycled, right? So, we're living in this world where there's tremendous opportunity to be involved in the good stuff.
I think that's really evident, especially here at the forum, as I was looking at our list of speakers, and like half of them are investment in like green energy, sustainability, all of that kind of stuff. So I even here, like even in the past couple of years, I've seen the uptick of people wanting to get into this business and caring about it.
Yeah, absolutely. You can be on the money side, on the capital side, on the finance side, as well as on the service side, as well as on the labor side, as well as on the technician side and technical side, engineering side.
There's jobs everywhere.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. And all those sides, they need support.
Well, I'm really looking forward to continuing our conversations together throughout the forum. We'll be here all week. And for now, where could people go to find out more about the solution service?
So you can search us at the ASU website. Just put in the Rob and Melanie Walton Sustainability Solutions Service. You can find me on the same website. You can look up Michael Dorsey at the ASU website. There's tons of resources there at the website, and I'm easily discoverable. So please reach out and be in touch.
So if you guys are listening right now, you'd like to learn more about this, I'll make it easy on you. You guys can scroll down to the show notes. I'll put some links right there so you guys can go straight from listening to learning more about everything. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today. This is a really fantastic conversation.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you all.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conservation Connection.
If you enjoyed our podcast, go ahead and subscribe to make sure you catch every episode that we post.
If you've got a minute to spare, leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts helps other conservation-minded people find the show. We'd really appreciate it.
A big thanks to everyone working to protect our planet, and a big thanks to you for listening. See you next time.